In the name of God, who creates, who redeems, and who sustains. The wanderer is always prepared. That's the takeaway. Most of us don't like to be wanderers. I don't like it very much. My family are immigrants. I like the idea of being settled. I believe that there are people that feel settled, but I suspect that it's false, and that our tradition teaches us that it's a false thing, that we are all wanderers on this earth. And the desire to create something settled might be the great danger. So the readings today, kind of frightening. Be ready, any minute now. The light will shine, and when that light shines, we're in trouble. It will be a harsh light. What are we getting ready for? What act of mercy do you have that's good enough that when that light shines on you and the thief comes and the master returns, that you're doing exactly what you would want to be seen? When I was a new priest in Los Angeles, I did the children's chapel as well. Whoever preached finished the sermon and walked over to chapel with the kids in another building. I remember walking over once, and this little guy, he's got to be 20 now. He was 6 or 7, little. Looks over and sees me coming, and they're all goofing off like kids should do. They're playing around in their pews. They're little pews designed just for them. He sees me coming out of the corner of his eye, investments towards them through the door, and he drops the kneeler, drops to his knees, and goes like that, and then looks at me like that to make sure I caught it. I think we often think that's what we're supposed to be doing. But this is much more profound than acts of righteousness, and I don't mean that our acts of righteousness are foolish. I think it's about the depth of who we actually are on this planet. So I've been in India for a couple of weeks, and it's always hard for me to come back from India and have a lot of words. I don't have a lot of words. So I'm trying, but it's not my gift after trips like this. And I read an article from a couple of years ago while I was there, and it was about a church in the northeast part of India, a Catholic church. And the northeast is very removed from the rest of India. It's in the foothills of the Himalayas. It's very, very far from what's considered the center. It's underdeveloped, probably intentionally by the government. It's on the border. People there look different than people expect Indians to look. They look like they could be from Bhutan or Nepal or parts of Western China. They're treated pretty badly. But because they're so isolated, they've preserved culture, very distinct and interesting languages and cultural practices. So the local Roman Catholic Church a couple of years ago decides to put up a statue of the Holy Mother. It's happening all over India at this time in the Roman Catholic Church. It was a little merry trend that there were going to be these statues of her that look like local women. So there's one in Maharashtra and Bombay. There's some in Calcutta. So the person up there I think in Jharkhand and Ranchi decides to put one up. And it's gorgeous, I think. The woman's skin looks like a local person. Her hair is held back in a way that the local woman would have put back her hair traditionally. She is wearing a red sari blouse and a white sari with a red border, which is the sari of those people, of that place, if you're an old-fashioned woman. And she's even carrying a baby in a cloth sling around her body. Right? So there's Jesus, as though he was a child from a tribal area in India. It's pretty touching, right? Who's going to be against that? Beautiful. So of course there's a protest right away, which is why I got to read about it. It was in the paper. So if that happened here, you can sort of imagine the protest. It would be that Mary as we have her is fine. Why mess with that? What's all this interpretation stuff we've got to do? That wasn't the complaint. The protest was from people who were not Christian, from political powers, but people who were not Christian, and lived in that local place and said, this is really confusing and is going to cause a lot of conversion out of confusion. What was confusing? So this person, unprompted, with no background in Christianity, from rural northeast India, says to the media, this is printed and quoted in many, many articles, the best language of evangelism I've ever heard. He says, people are going to look at that, and we're simple people, we're not educated, and if we see Mary that looks like us, we're going to think that the goddess appeared here as her. We're going to think that she came to us for us, that she is with us, that she's one of us, and people might convert. God, I remain so jealous of the idea that an image of Mary could do that anywhere. What could we put out in front of Trinity Church that would cause people to walk down Wall Street and Broadway and say, oh my God, this is for us. This message of liberation and freedom and justice is for us, clearly to us, has come for us, is one of us, understands us, comes from where our deepest anxieties and fears about who we are sit, and claims that as the face of God. We don't have anything like that. I can't think of anything. Maybe you can. If you can, please let me know. Let us all know. I suspect in this country it would have to be quite diverse. There would have to be a lot of images that draw us to that. And I think, like India, it's actually not simply about identity, because it's not enough that these images work in all these different places. They're actually a large democracy trying to figure out how to be a nation together under many of the same forces that we are in this time, equally terrifying. There they call it secularism. We don't call it that here, though we are secular as well. We call it democracy, right? The flourishing of our democracy, capacity in our public life to speak to issues of justice and freedom and compassion. But there, like here, which is part of why we went on this trip, we spent specifically to look at seminaries. How do you talk about God in theological education? How do you talk about the people trained to talk about God, to make sense of God in this place and in this time, in the democracies, in the real landscapes that we live in? So there's the starting point that God is for us, and that's hard enough. But they nailed it in some of these images, right? God is for us. But then what is the us after our identity? So in India, historically, in the last generation or so, that's been about an opposition to outside forces. And that's actually fairly straightforward. There's some bad guys out there, good guys in here. It's become much more complex recently when there's been one way to be a proper Indian and one way to be religious, and one version of Hinduism that is correct of the many kinds. And so these seminaries feel under assault. How can we be faithful when we are only 3% of the population of India? Our people are 3%. Now 3% of 1 billion is still a lot of people, but only 3% of the electorate. How do we stand up and speak out against injustice? How is it possible? How do we survive? What's interesting to me is how much that sounds like how we talk here. We are the majority. We actually just are. Christians are. But the way the religious right since the 80s has claimed the voice of Christianity, almost all of us that sit in rooms like this feel like a minority, don't we? Whether that's by race or belief or sexual orientation or gender, right? We feel like a minority. As some of the most powerful people on the planet, all of us, we feel like a disenfranchised minority. Isn't that something? You wonder what image we'd have to put out in front of Trinity Wall Street for us to feel differently about ourselves and claim the power that we sort of intuitively know we have but can't figure out how to express. And clearly, this is an issue in every generation and in every time. We hear in our first reading that in the time of Isaiah, the people have given up on feeding the widow and helping out the orphan. That was just too much for them. They were too busy with their incense and their sacrifices to appease the God who must be angry because things had gone to hell all around them. God must be furious. And we do it in every time. So in a time like this, when we are told again to sacrifice those who wander the earth looking for refuge, those who struggle to eat and survive, those who cannot guarantee that their children will be educated, and they were not, living right around us, we are told, we are told that we must believe there's only so much of that we can pay attention to. It is never ending, like in the time of Isaiah and in the time of the Hebrews. The great innovation, right, of the letter to the Hebrews is it doesn't say, all this crap has happened in your history, but I've got a new idea in Jesus. The letter to the Hebrews says, your history is full of wandering fools. Idiots like Abraham, who when he should have been planning his burial site and the service with some really good hymns, decides to pack up his tent and grab Sarah and go for a walk. And says that God has led him out to go seek something unknown and unexpected, and the great nation of Israel is founded because of his foolishness. It reminds us, and the letter to the Hebrews reminds us, that by faith, nothing else, no good sense, no logical decision-making, no caving in to other forces around them, but by faith, Abraham puts one foot in front of the other, and in foolishness causes the impossible to happen. We live in a time like that again, and most times are like that. They require our faith. Now, we have faith in all kinds of things. I know I do. I booked a ticket to India. I have faith in airlines. I have faith in internet. I have faith in subway doors. I have faith in the water coming out of the faucet. I live my whole life based on all kinds of foolish, illogical faith in the systems that we live within. And I have proof on television every day that I shouldn't have any faith in any of those things, and yet I do, because I need it to live. And what if we did the same with this text? And I think it's what the letter to the Hebrews tells us. This is what we're supposed to be equipped with, is to walk with this faith of our ancestors, this God who has been for us and with us, come to us over time, again and again and again in the text, and if you are lucky, in your family, in your heritage, in your own life, for you. And not for you just so that you can be an advocate for yourself, though God bless you, go for that as well. But like that woman, it's not that they put up a statue of the most powerful woman in Jharkhand. She wasn't wearing diamonds. There wasn't a crown. She wasn't a memory of a queen they once had. She was a simple peasant woman, the person in India whose body is actually most vulnerable right now, with a baby. Literally the body most vulnerable in that nation right now is how we are able to say in our tradition, God has come among us. And so we too are invited by faith to see where God has come among us. On our last day there, in the seminaries in India, you think the seminaries here are having a tough time, or higher education here is having a tough time. Seminaries in India are having a tough time. It's a hard time to figure out how to be a seminary. These places 60 years ago were fomenting rebellion and prophetic teaching, building the nation, as everybody was. And today, figuring out how to survive. How do you make ministers for this church? How do you keep the church safe? And violence is a real danger in a way that it's not here. And how do you keep the church prophetic? Because if it's not, why does it matter? And it's a valid question there. Why does it matter that we're doing this thing so difficult if there isn't a purpose? Less of a question sometimes for us, I think. So we went to the final seminary, the one that should have been the most afraid, frankly, the smallest one, the one in a place in rural Tamil Nadu, so in a place sort of like these hills that's a little bit isolated. The people there are taught in the local language. They don't have brilliant careers in front of them. They have modest careers in front of them. They used to be a great progressive place, and they're still struggling to be, but are more sexist than they used to be. There aren't as many women as there used to be. More and more of the men that are there, and the women will say, there's only so much we can do or say, the people won't bear it. The first day we're there, in the morning we went to chapel. This gorgeous space like this, if there was no roof after these pillars. Right, this open and gorgeous place with deep eaves. The water could come down and cool it. The air would flow through the thing. And there were no pews in it. And in the front sat 10 or 11 people on the ground in white, which is the traditional dress of that place. Mostly men in the front and one woman in the center. Interesting in this place where they're struggling with, what do you do with women in leadership? Really traditional patriarchal kinds of ideas about leadership. She plays her instrument and starts to sing. It took me a minute to realize the entire service was call and response. So you have this powerful voice of a very young woman leading this entire group in worship. And I have to say, at some point, I just started to sit like this, because who can't see what I can see? How can we not see that this is the most powerful person in the room, sitting right there in the middle of all of them? There she is. Very unlikely that she comes out of there and ends up in a job. Very unlikely that she has the options to live her life in the church in the way that everybody else sitting in that row does. Unlikely, but who knows? She was really fierce. God knows what she will make possible in the world, or what God will make possible. But I wonder in the church if often this is where we live. We get a little glimpse of those things by faith, if we're smart enough, or clever enough, or vulnerable, or jet-lagged, or open enough. By faith, what could be? What should be if God were to come kind of like us, like the people around us in a lot of need? What if God came and looked sort of like us, came for us, came to us, came to make justice here, came to people like that child who pushed a dinghy through the seas fleeing from Syria and now swims on the Olympic team, right, of refugees, 3 hours in freezing cold water? That's faith in something that I want to believe in as well. Those children that are wanderers like Abraham coming across the Mediterranean by themselves because their mothers have died, bringing them across the Sahara Desert. I want to have faith in something like their faith. We are asked to do nothing more today but to be ready. It's terrifying, isn't it? To be prepared. What would it even look like? We are told that we have a heritage of wanderers, the kind of people who got prepared by packing up tents and carrying what they could and bringing along those who they loved. May we, like them, persist in the vision that God has given for all of us by faith.